Today, we're diving into a huge shift in the American economy. We're talking about a story of how things were totally and completely remade, leading us right to the world we live in today.
And it all kicks off with this central mystery. You see, for decades after World War II, when the economy grew, worker pay grew right along with it. It was like a law of nature. And then, all of a sudden, in the 1970s, that connection just snapped. Why? What happened? Well, that's the big question we're digging into.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the post-war order and see where the cracks started to show. Then, we're going to zero in on the pivotal year of 1971. After that, we'll uncover a secret playbook that changed, well, everything. We'll see how that playbook actually remade the economy. And finally, we'll look at the staggering result, something called the Great Divergence. Okay, let's get into it.
To really get what happened in the 70s, we've got to rewind the clock a little bit. We need to understand the world that existed before then, a world that on the surface seemed incredibly stable, but was actually under some serious pressure.
So after World War II, the entire global economy pretty much ran on this thing called the Bretton Woods system. Now, the main thing you need to know about it is that it anchored all the world's currencies to the US dollar, and the dollar, in turn, was backed by gold. It created this really stable, predictable economic playground that worked for about 25 years. But by the 1960s, this whole system was starting to buckle under two huge pressures. First, you had massive social upheaval. The civil rights movement was creating a really powerful political backlash. And at the exact same time, you had enormous government spending on the Vietnam War, without raising taxes to pay for it, which was just overheating the economy and making the dollar itself look pretty shaky.
And that brings us right to our second section. Because all that pressure, it was about to explode, kicking off a chain reaction that would completely tear down the old system.
I mean, just look at this cascade of events in the early 70s. It's wild. In 71, President Nixon basically says, okay, we're done, and just abandons the Bretton Woods system. The dollar is no longer fixed, it's floating. That same year, and this is going to be important later, he appoints a corporate lawyer named Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court. And then boom, in 1973, OPEC quadruples the price of oil overnight, sending this massive shockwave through the entire global economy.
And the result of all this chaos was this miserable new economic disease that nobody had ever seen before: stagflation. I mean, think about it. Prices are skyrocketing, but at the same time, unemployment is also skyrocketing. The economy was basically stuck in the mud and on fire at the same time. The old economic rulebook was totally useless, which created this huge crisis of confidence and a huge opening for some brand new ideas.
Okay, this is where our story really takes a turn. Because while everyone was panicking about stagflation, a plan was being drafted in secret. A playbook, really, that would lay the ideological groundwork for remaking the entire American economy. Remember Lewis Powell, the guy Nixon put on the Supreme Court? Well, just before he got the job in 1971, he wrote a confidential memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And this wasn't just some casual note. Powell was arguing that the American free enterprise system was under a full-on attack and that its very survival was on the line. It was, in no uncertain terms, a call to arms for American business to get organized, get aggressive, and fight back for the long haul.
And Powell laid out a very clear, very specific strategy. He said business needed to fund its own intellectual firepower, think tanks, to cook up and promote pro-business ideas. It needed to build a massive lobbying army in Washington to get in front of lawmakers. And it needed to fight at the state level, creating ready-to-go model laws that could be passed all over the country.
And what's absolutely fascinating is how quickly this playbook became reality. I mean, take a look here. Just a few years after the memo, you get the creation of the Heritage Foundation in 1973, then the Cato Institute a little later, and ALEC, also founded in 73, which was set up to do exactly what Powell called for: write model bills for state legislatures to push a pro-business agenda. This was not a drill, it was happening, and it was happening fast.
So the really crucial thing to get here is that this was a fundamental 180-degree turn in thinking. The old post-war idea, influenced by the economist Keynes, was that government had a really important job in managing the economy for everybody. The new idea, coming from thinkers like Hayek, said the exact opposite, that free markets and individuals create prosperity, and that government regulation is actually the problem, a threat to our freedom.
So let's jump to our next section and see how this new ideology didn't just stay in books and reports, it was turned into massive policy changes that completely reshaped American life. This new playbook had some serious signature moves.
To kill stagflation once and for all, the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker cranked interest rates way up on purpose, creating a nasty recession to crush inflation. President Reagan went after organized labor, famously firing over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers. You had sweeping deregulation, which basically took the handcuffs off major industries. And of course, taxes were cut in a big way, especially for the wealthiest Americans.
And we can see a really clear example of the real-world fallout. Deregulation wasn't just a theory. When they loosened the rules for savings and loans institutions, it kicked off this wave of super risky speculative behavior. And the result? A huge financial crisis. A third of all S&Ls went belly up, and taxpayers were left holding a $100 billion bag.
And this quote from President Reagan's first inaugural address just perfectly nails the sea change. The idea that was born in the Powell Memo and nurtured by the think tanks was now the official philosophy of the United States government. The whole idea of what government was for had been completely redefined.
So after decades of this project to remake the economy, what was the end result? Well, our final section reveals the outcome, and it is absolutely stark. It's known as the Great Divergence.
The Congressional Budget Office actually went back and looked at what happened to American incomes after all these changes really took hold. So let's look at the numbers, and let's start from the bottom. Between 1979 and 2011, after you adjust for inflation and taxes, the income for the bottom fifth of American households went up
by 48%. Now, that's over a 32-year period. A real gain for sure, but a modest one. Okay, hold that number, 48% in your head.
Now, let's ask the same question, but for the people at the very, very top. In that exact same time frame, what happened to the inflation-adjusted after-tax income for the top 1%? It grew by 200%. Not 48, 200. This is the Great Divergence. It's like two completely different economic realities were happening in the same country at the same time.
And here is the crucial conclusion from the source material we've been exploring. This didn't happen by accident. It wasn't just some inevitable force of nature or globalization. It was the direct and honestly foreseeable result of the policies we just walked through, from deregulation and tax cuts to the weakening of unions, all of it stemming from a deliberate, long-term effort to re-engineer the American economy.
So, we've traced a line from decades of deliberate policy choices all the way to the economy we are living in right now. And that leaves us with the one big critical question: what happens next?